I call this meeting to order.
23 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. Le comité se réunit sur son étude.
The committee is meeting on its study, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the government's ability to deliver information in both official languages. This is the last sitting for this study.
In an early meeting, I would like to outline a few words to follow. Attendez, je voudrais profiter de cette occasion pour...
I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. This was also highlighted by Speaker Rota.
Witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen or either floor English or French. A reminder that comments should be addressed through the chair. Lorsque vous parlez, exprimez-vous lentement et...
When you speak, please speak slowly and clearly.
In exceptional circumstances, the use of headset with a boom microphone is mandatory for everyone participating remotely. Et s'il y a un problème...
If there is any problem, do not hesitate to let me know or let the clerk know, because we must ensure the full participation of all members. Since there is no one present physically in the room, I will now welcome our witnesses. First, I would like to thank them for having accepted our invitation. Today, our witnesses will have 7.5 minutes each for the presentation, which will be followed by question and answer period. And if you'll look here, from time to time during your speech, I will show you the yellow card when you have 1 minute left, and I'll show you the red card when your time is up. Dear committee members, given that we will have 2 7.5-minute opening statements, and given the time at which our meeting began, the last 5-minute question round will not be possible. So if you would like to share your time with others, please feel free to do so. This afternoon, it is my great pleasure to welcome the Canada Border Services Agency, the CBSA. We have Denis Vinette, who is Vice President of the Travelers Branch, and Ms. Louise Udale, Vice President of the Human Resources Branch. And from the Office of the French Language Services Commissioner of Ontario, we have Kelly Burke, French Language Services Commissioner of Ontario. Welcome to you. And Mr. Carl Bouchard, Director of Operations at the French Language Services Unit. I will begin with the Canada Border Services Agency. The floor is yours. Please go ahead. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee members, welcome. Everyone, it's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Denis Vinette. I am the General Director of the Travelers Unit. I am representing the CBSA today, and Louise Udale is with me today, Vice President of the Human Resources Branch, and she supervises the Official Languages Program at our organization. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you all that has been done by our agency to provide services and information in both official languages, despite the ongoing pandemic and in respect of Canada's Official Languages Act. The CBSA takes its official languages obligations seriously, whether dealing with external clients or with its own employees. The most frequent ways we interact with the public are the following: in person at a point of entry, by telephone on our Border Information Service line, and with visits to our website and on our social media channels. As you all know, the pandemic required the agency to implement a number of public health measures at the border. in a dynamic environment. It was and still is an evolving situation. However, I assure you that we have not compromised on providing services in both official languages. In fact, not only have we continued to embrace linguistic duality during the pandemic, but we have prioritized it to ensure that essential public health measures were well understood by Canadians and travelers alike. The CBSA is committed to offering travelers services of equal quality in the official language of their choice at all ports of entry designated as bilingual. At our ports of entry, services, signage, and information material are provided according to the official language's rules for that region, and when there is a significant demand from the official language minority communities. Should a situation arise where a language barrier exists, the CBSA officer handling the situation will either switch languages, ask another officer who speaks the language to engage, or contact an interpreter. In fact, in a 2020 public opinion research study by Ipsos, 98% of respondents who had interactions with a border services officer said it took place in the official language of their choice. The CBSA considers that it has consistently provided service of equal quality when travelers arrive at a bilingual port of entry, and that the following occurs. Every traveler is greeted in the official language of their choice, every traveler is served by an officer with the required language skills, and every traveler receives all documentation in the official language of their choice.
Includes the ability to identify the linguistic profile of employees in order to prioritize the scheduling of bilingual officers at a port of entry when required. The technology in use at ports of entry is available in both official languages. Our primary inspection kiosk can be used by travelers in either English or French. People seeking information from the CBSA are also welcome to contact us by phone. Our business information service line provides information on CBSA programs, services, and initiatives. There's an automated telephone service that provides recorded information in both French and English. In addition, live agents are available during business hours to answer questions in either official language. Even before the pandemic started, visits to our websites were trending up to become the main way information is shared with the public. Our statistics tell us that we had more than 1 million visits to our web pages between June and December of 2020. We ensure that all information is available in both official languages at the same time, and that the linguistic quality of our text is of the highest standards. In fact, all content produced for our social media, our websites, and applications are always available in both of Canada's official languages from the moment they are made public. And during the pandemic, signage at our ports of entry has been bilingual from the start. All brochures shared with the traveling public have also been available in both official languages from the onset of the pandemic. I know I have focused so far on the services we provide to our clients, but rest assured, our internal practices are as equally important. All internal correspondence to our employees is available in both English and French. Our intranet, messages, and bulletins are available in both languages, again, at the same time. But we can always improve our external and internal practices, and more can be done in support of Canada's official languages. We know the concerns of the Commissioner of Official Languages in regards to the CBSA in his 2019 audit report. The Commissioner mentions recruitment, mechanisms to assess bilingual service delivery, and challenges building and maintaining relationships with official language minority communities. To respond, the CBSA has developed a comprehensive action plan to increase bilingual capacity. By September 2021, tools and reference documents will be developed for managers and workshops will be provided on bilingual meetings. And by February of 2022, we will have updated our active offer training and relaunched it online so that CBSA officers proactively offer quality service to the public in both official languages. We also expect to establish a national advisory committee for official languages composed of regional and branch ambassadors. Finally, I want to assure you that all allegations or complaints regarding official languages are always taken very seriously and are thoroughly investigated and acted upon accordingly. In closing, let me assure you again that the Canada Border Services Agency is fully committed to the Official Languages Act. We would be happy to provide more details and answer the committee's questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Binet. It was right on time. Thank you so much. So now I would like to invite Madame Burke, la commissaire au service en français de l'Ontario, à faire sa présentation et vous avez 7 minutes et demie.
And now we will have Ms. Kelly Burke, the French Language Services Commissioner of Ontario, with a presentation 7.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, good afternoon. I would like to thank you warmly for myself and for Mr. Claire Bouchard, our Director of Operations French Language Services Unit, here with me. Thank you for this opportunity to share my experience as the Commissioner of French Language Services in Ontario concerning the delivery of French language services in Ontario since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Ontario is the economic heart of our country and is the province with the largest French-speaking population in Canada outside of Quebec. Therefore, the province plays an essential role in Canada's francophonie and in our Canadian identity. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to review our work methods, our operational structures, and our personal lives. Now that vaccination is underway, we must ask, how are language rights assured in an ever-changing world? Regardless of changes that take place, official languages must remain a priority. Changes must strengthen and improve the provision of services in both official languages. Most provinces and territories have either legislation or policies that deal with official languages, often with French language services. Their experience differs, but the issues are often quite similar. Therefore, I thank you for taking Ontario's experience into consideration as part of your reflection. On the 10th of December 2020, we, at the Office of the Ombudsman, released a French Language Services report, an annual report, 2019-2020, and I made 8 recommendations that were based on the cases that we had handled. What I would like you to take away from remarks today is that to be successful in providing services in an official language, governments must prioritize language, plan strategically upstream, evaluate the results of their strategies, and learn from their experiences in order to aim for excellence, not a bare minimum. In a communication that I had with the Premier of Ontario in April 2020, we agreed that Francophones in Ontario have the right to receive communication services in French that are equal to those provided in English. And we agreed that this is all the more important during this time of crisis. In addition to good intentions, we also need effective strategies. And that's what I would like to offer to you today, solutions. 73% of the cases we processed in our annual reporting had to do with written, in-person, and online communications. This is a trend that continues to this day and is seen across the country. Here are some examples of cases that we've handled in Ontario. We've received many complaints about the Ontario Premier's daily press briefings that were solely in English, at least at the beginning of the crisis. I have heard from complainants that their elderly Francophone parents in Ontario, who do not understand English very well, had to rely on Quebec or the federal government for information about COVID-19. The instructions sent to the public by the neighboring provincial jurisdiction and those sent by the federal government were not the same, though, as those sent to Ontario citizens by their own provincial government. And this created confusion. Our intervention contributed to efforts to implement simultaneous interpretation for press briefings, a practice that I recommended that the government make permanent. We received many complaints about government websites designed during the pandemic, either because they were launched first in English and later in French with a significant delay, of a few days sometimes, or because the site was only partially translated. We received numerous complaints about the government's plans developed during the pandemic, including the plan Protecting Ontarians, Preparing for Future Waves of COVID-19, which was released in English first and in French 24 hours later. We also received many complaints about local public health units over which the government has little control and to which the French Language Services Act does not apply. So the people who contacted us were concerned. Some were worried for their safety or the safety of their loved ones. Many felt that the lack of French language services showed a lack of respect by the government toward Francophones. These examples and this testimony, along with many other complaints, led me to the following conclusions. It is essential to plan the service offer in both official languages from the outset and in a strategic way. Recruitment and working environments must be conducive to attracting and retaining bilingual professionals in key positions. It is important to strengthen translation and interpretation capacity, which allow for the accommodations that are often necessary and are justified. Legislation must be consistent to allow for uninterrupted service delivery, especially when it comes to the health of the Canadian public. I have actually recommended to the Government of Ontario that each ministry submit a French language services plan to the Executive Council by the 1st of April 2022, that these plans be made public and that annual updates be made public as well. Governments must work together and support each other to find solutions and ensure that both official languages truly have equal status. This is all the more important in times of emergency, when a minority language tends to be relegated to secondary importance. Thank you for listening, and I will be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Ms. Burke. Very interesting, both of these presentations. And you have respected the time limits. Thank you. Now we will move into a question period. And the four MPs to now speak will have 6 minutes each. And I will begin with our Vice President of the committee, Mr. Blaney. You have 6 minutes, sir. Thank you very much, Chair. I will try to share my time with my good colleague. I believe it was Mr. Godin, if he is ready to pick up. Yes, good. So, with your permission, Chair, I as well welcome our two groups of witnesses, Ms. Burke and Mr. Vinette, more particularly. Mr. Vinette, I'm so sorry that the virus came in over the border and you were on the first lines, weren't you? And you did mention that you reacted to the comments made by the Commissioner of Official Languages, who mentioned that he had received, or they had received, several complaints about the Canadian Border Services Agency, and it's been mentioned that it's so important to be served in your first language in times of crisis and during emergencies. So you were explaining how you are improving the agency, and you even mentioned a timeline. You mentioned September. Could you tell us what you have underway at present in response to the recommendations made by the Commissioner of Official Languages? It will be a pleasure for me to begin, and perhaps my colleague of Human Resources branch to add anything that they wish. One of our big concerns that really has been a concern for a number of years is to ensure that we do indeed have in place the measures, policies, and practices of our officers to ensure that the service is always offered and is always delivered at all times in all places without any exceptions. So for us, we want to make sure that we have an internal action plan that is responsive not only to the findings of the Commissioner, but also our own findings. One, ensuring that we have the employees, the people we need to offer the service, and also internally to respect the rights of our employees across the country, whether they're in Quebec or anywhere really in any region, to ensure that the services they have access to is appropriate and that what they're able to offer Canadians is always available in a bilingual format. Now, there are a number of themes in this regard, and perhaps I could ask my colleague, Madame Udall, to tell us more about the action plan. Certainly. Madame Udall, you have the floor.
So as Mr. Denis mentioned, there are various facets to our annual plan. And really they're grounded in first, strategic planning and governance, as well training and development and general people management. And as I talk about our themes, I'll try to make reference to the findings that we learned from as a result of the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages report. So firstly, one of the key actions is that we have made the responsibility for establishing an appropriate culture that gives due attention to both official languages in the workplace, a mandatory commitment in performance agreements of our leaders within the organization. The second thing that we have done is we have looked at our the actual designation of positions, and we have ensured that when opportunities present themselves, we are continuously reviewing the bilingual designation of positions and elevating them where there are opportunities. Here, I'd like to make reference to one of the findings that of the report, where the Commissioner was satisfied with the work that we had done to increase the number of superintendents, and as a result, we partially met the recommendation, but was disappointed, and it was partial because they were disappointed that we had actually increased the gap in terms of the number of employees who did not meet the linguistic profile. We are happy to report that we further elevated the number of bilingual superintendent positions, now at 214, and 99.1% of the incumbents meet the linguistic profile of their positions.
214 superintendent. How much is it of the total number of superintendent that you have?
That would be 31.2%.
30%. Excellent. Merci beaucoup. Madame Burke, ma sœur habite.
Ms. Burke, my sister lives in Ontario and often listens to Mr. Legault's press conferences to know what to do during the pandemic, and you referred in what you've told us to this. Have there been corrections made to the situation? Yes, a couple of weeks after the beginning of the crisis, thanks to our intervention, as well as the intervention of other members of the community, the President of the Assembly, who also spoke to the issue, well, on the YouTube chain, press releases are now in both languages. That was of great help responding to the needs of Francophones in the province. It was thanks to our involvement that the Premier himself recognized the real need to communicate in an equal way in both official languages.
In terms of press briefings, it's been recognized, and of course we're always working on improving that service. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say, Madam Commissioner, that we've realized that official languages are particularly important in a crisis situation. It's not just a cultural issue, it's a safety issue as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Planey, and now Mr. Duguid will have the next 7 minutes. Terry?
Mr. Chair, and I want to thank both of our delegations for coming to see us today on this important topic. My questions are to our friends from the CBSA, and first let me just thank you for all of your hard work. As Mr. Blaney said, on the front lines, we know the pandemic has been challenging for all of us. We've had to be flexible. Public measures have been changing rapidly, as you know, and undoubtedly will change again, particularly as we ease our way out of this pandemic. I'm very interested in some of the additional measures that you put in place during the pandemic when some of these measures were introduced by the federal government, particularly the closing of the border, just in terms of staff complements and beefing up the complement of bilingual officers. This won't be the last pandemic we have, by the way. I'm certainly told by public health officials that more are on their way. And then a bit of a corollary to that question, my understanding is that there is a shortage of bilingual officers. I'm wondering if you can give me a little more detail about your plan, targets, and dates by which you will fulfill the conditions of your plan.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Excellent question. In my 29 years, and this is all I've done, I started off as an officer on the front lines and have been with the organizations ever since. I've never seen the type of escalation of border measures that I've seen in the last 12 months. And in order to be successful to respond to both the pandemic and the government direction, we established within the CBSA a few task forces. So I'm responsible for the CBSA's COVID Border Task Force, which has been implementing the measures right from the get-go. And one of the immediate measures in establishing that task force, which is a subgroup of experts, was bringing in some dedicated translation services so that as we needed to develop bulletins, procedures, work with our regions, that we had the ability in our own in-house translation services, so that as things came into effect, and oftentimes decisions were made and orders and councils signed late in the day that required implementation at 1 minute after midnight, we had the ability to have the products ready to go. From a communications perspective, we've also established an internal task force and a strategic policy task force, and the three task force work together. And our strategic policy task force encompasses our communications directorate. And so again, we ensured that we had dedicated translation services so that as we started our information campaigns on our social media, our web pages, we were able to do so in both official languages. And certainly, we did that successfully. Maybe pass it over to my colleague, but I would thank the chair for the recognition of our men and women on the front lines and the work that they've been doing and what we've asked of them. It has not been an easy task, and I appreciate the recognition. Thank you.
Thank you. In addition to the measures that Denise spoke to, Mr. Vanette spoke to, we also ensured that we were continuing to supply bilingual candidates to the front line. So the agency has its own school, and during the pandemic, that actually has 16 instructors. And during the pandemic, we switched to a virtual classroom so that we were able to continue to provide that French language training. So we will be graduating 736 participants from that French language training. And in terms of goals that we're hoping to achieve, currently, when we look at the front line, 96.8% of individuals in those bilingual positions meet the requirements of their position. And of course, we would like to elevate that to the same number that we are seeing with our superintendents now, which is approximately 99.1%. So in addition to the training, we are continuing to develop our recruitment program. We have a frontline officer recruitment program that has been informed as a result of our engagement with the official languages minority communities across the country. Once we establish the new National Advisory Committee on Official Languages that was previously referenced, we will continue to learn from that engagement and inform that National Officer Recruitment Program.
I think I have time for one more question, and the Official Language Commissioner's audit of the agency was referenced earlier by your presentation and some of our questioners. I'm just, he indicated there was the need for more bilingual superintendents within the CBSA. I'm wondering what you are doing to close the gap on that particular item that the Commissioner of Official Languages had highlighted.
So the gap that they had highlighted is that we had actually increased the number, but they were not meeting the linguistic profiles of their positions. We further increased the number to 214, and we focused on ensuring that the incumbents receive the training that they required to meet their linguistic profiles, and we now stand at 99.1% of them meeting them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Duguid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duguid. And now we're going to move for the next 6 minutes on to Mr. Beaulieu. You have the floor. Yes. I'm always somewhat concerned when there's a very big difference between reality and what is being presented to us. I understand that the CBSA says they've always provided quality services to travelers. Every traveler is welcomed in the language of their choice. But in 2015, the Commissioner of Official Languages tabled a report with certain recommendations, and he did a follow-up on it afterwards. And his conclusion was that the agency hasn't made progress and that there's a lot of work left to be done. There are systemic obstacles to getting French services at the border. And they're saying, he said another problem was the insufficient number of bilingual agents at the border. And between 2015 and 2017, he didn't see any improvements in hiring of bilingual officers. And he even said that the number of superintendents, the bilingual ones, went down from 90% to 76% in 2017. So I'd like to know where we are at exactly today. The Commissioner of Official Languages said that it's impossible to assess the bilingual service because there's no oversight mechanism of these agents, and there's no oversight in the airports to see if there is bilingual service offered. So the Commissioner of Official Languages said that there is an absence of bilingual services offered. And this is true in COVID times. So whether it's in international airports or at the land borders. So how is this divergence between what you said and what seems to be the reality according to the Official Languages Commissioner? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. It's a continuous effort for us, and certainly during the pandemic. As you know, there are very few arrivals, and we only have 4 airports receiving passengers. So we've made every effort possible to make the border controls such that we have the necessary bilingual employees there. They've been reassigned from different areas. So we are always looking for bilingual officers. And whether it's through internal training, as my colleague was mentioning, we have our school. And this is a school that we created within the agency. So it's under our control. And we've continued to make efforts to recruit people. So I think of where I'm at the moment. We have people coming from the University of Ottawa and the Cité Collégiale. We obviously target Francophone areas. But we're always at the same time looking for people, as are the RCMP, Municipal Services, Correctional Services, and others. And so to find people that are bilingual at the outset, it's a little more difficult. In terms of services, one complaint is always too many, but we do have measures in place to ensure that the services are provided at all times, and that if it's through an interpreter or a colleague, if someone wishes to receive services in the language of their choice, they'll get it. It's a sustained effort that we're making through our action plan, and we're still seeking to follow up with the Commissioner's comments. All right, well, that's fine. But if we look at the number of complaints he talks about and what we've seen in the media, the reports in the media, it seems to be very difficult to be served in French at the border. And so I don't know. Are you admitting that there are problems? Because, for example, the director at the Official Languages Office said that so long as the agency doesn't overcome these obstacles, it will remain to be the case. So do you admit that there are numerous problems and that we really have to make a great effort to change that? Well, Mr. Chairman, I can assure you that there is a sustained commitment to making it so. As a Francophone and an employee of the organization for 29 years now, I understand that we have all of the necessary measurements in place, and our CEO is committed to respecting the Official Languages Act and providing those services. Pre-COVID, we had something like 86 million travelers that crossed the border, and we received something like 31 complaints. So there's 31 complaints too many, but we are seeking to ensure that all of the people who come across the border, they'll be able to get those services in the language of their choice, and we continue to make efforts to ensure it is so. Okay. Can you tell me, on the one hand, how many employees the agency employs, and how many of them speak French? How many superintendents as well? And as well, I was speaking with a lawyer, and he told me that very often he speaks French to the agent, and he's answered in English. It's almost systematic. So how do you explain that? Mr. Beaulieu, I'm sorry, but your time has run out. The question was too long. But you'll have an opportunity to come back and ask another one of Mr. Vinet later. So thank you. Now we'll move to Mr. Boulris for the next 6 minutes. Mr. Boulris. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much to our witnesses who are our witnesses this afternoon for this study. And these hearings will conclude soon. My first question is for the border agency. For several years, and we're talking about 2015 to 2019, the Official Languages Commissioner has told us that there have been a lot of gaps in services provided to bilingual travelers. So can you tell us what measures have been taken to overturn this? And could you send the committee the list of all of the Official Languages Commissioner's recommendations that you haven't been able to implement yet? Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. And I would ask my colleague to add to this afterward. But it comes back to the Commissioner's observations. We're continually in discussion with him, and we have a 3-year plan that we have set up. There are as a series of recommendations, and there are 3 themes that are intended to deal with these observations and to ensure that we have the organizational capacity to offer those services to people, and also the necessary tools for our agents, whether they're bilingual or not, to ensure that we have the necessary technology to ensure that there is contact in the language of choice at all times, in the major centers and as in the smaller centers as well, over the telephone perhaps. So perhaps I could turn the floor over to my colleague who will have more information on this for you.
So we were provided with 8 recommendations, 2 which we fully met, and they related to engaging minority communities, the official languages minority communities, as well as our efforts in the area of training. So those recommendations were fully satisfied. There were 4 that were partially satisfied. One was with regard to our need to ensure that our superintendents were bilingual, and I've addressed that we now have 99.1% meeting their linguistic profiles. The other recommendation related to our need to increase efforts in terms of designing targeted recruitment strategies. And we now have launched have developed the frontline officer recruitment program that was informed by our engagement of the official languages minority communities that is in play, and we are hoping that that will assist us in achieving our goals. The other recommendation had to do with a review. Sorry, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No,
I would actually like to ask another question. So for the 6 recommendations that were not satisfied or were partially satisfied, I see that you will be able to satisfy those in the timeline you have given yourself, but I will ask you another question because the clock is ticking. So there was a problem for low-risk travelers called Nexus, letting people cross the border more quickly than normal. Will there be bilingual officers assigned at all times?
Dans les régions où ce que le service
In the regions where services must be provided in both languages because of the Port of Entry's bilingual designation, we will make sure that bilingual officers are there at all times, or also in other areas where we have more than one access point, we will make sure that one is designated as bilingual. I ask this question because twice members of my riding were sent into a regular zone where there was a bilingual officer available. And this type of procedure makes it so that a Francophone needs to choose between their rights with regard to that program and their linguistic rights. Can you ensure that this type of thing will no longer come to pass? I can assure you that we will continue to try and have bilingual designated officers at bilingual designated ports. Oftentimes, we move officers from one zone to another when we realize we need to serve a client in that official language. But we will continue to make sure we have bilingual agents at bilingual ports. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding training, how many frontline officers are unilingual or bilingual? Is that information public and categorized by province? I would have to ask my colleague. We might be able to send that later to the committee. Yes, if it's possible for you to send it to the committee, I would appreciate that greatly. We will do that. You have 30 seconds left, Mr. Bourris. Quickly, for the Ontario Ombudswoman, have you noticed significant differences regarding complaints before the pandemic and during the pandemic? Was it stable or was there a great increase? Very simple question. The complaints have been stable. I would say over the past year, we're always in the average of 300, 325 complaints per year. However, during the pandemic, we did clearly see an increase in complaints regarding the pandemic specifically, especially regarding communications. I mentioned documents which are not necessarily translated. So the complaints we received have a lot to do with communications, especially when it comes to health. So the complaints are stable, but there was a certain increase during the pandemic regarding communication in the pandemic. Thank you, Ms. Burke. We will now move on to the second round. And the next two MPs, both will have 5 minutes each, starting with Mr. Dalton for the next 5 minutes. Mr. Dalton. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will share my time with Mr. Godin. There are 4 designated airports for those arriving from abroad. 2 are in the west, in Vancouver and Calgary. The Canadian Official Languages Commissioner said there was a lack of bilingual service provided regarding COVID-19 by the CBSA at international airports of Canada. We also heard stories from Francophone Canadians who landed in those airports in the last year and had difficulty obtaining information on COVID and on quarantines in French. We now are seeing all sorts of problems with the hotel processes. Can you comment on this, especially comment on hotels, please, and on the quarantine? Thank you, Chair, for the question. I can give you a partial answer. at this time when people are coming back to their country across the world, we already did have bilingual officers, and we had a certain capacity in those 4 airports, as I said. And there was a significant volume of people coming back to the country, I would say, from March through May 2020. Now, when it comes to the quarantine, we deliver the information through the Canada Public Health Agency, and they prepare the materials and the information sheets. And when it comes to hotels, they are the ones who operate that, so I can't comment much further. Okay, thank you. Mr. Godin. Mr. Chair, may I have the floor? Yes, go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have many questions. I'll come back to what my colleague, Mr. Boulris, was asking about Nexus. I was surprised by your answer, Mr. Vinet. You mentioned that according to region, where there are a lot of francophones, there's a bilingual officer placed there. I wasn't quite expecting that from an organization or a federal government institution in a bilingual country. So can you assure me that me, as a francophone, if I choose to go use Nexus in a region that is mostly Anglophone, that I will be served in French? Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. In all regions where our programs are provided, they are provided in both official languages. The active provision must be, the active offer is at all times. We also have other procedures in place. So you should be able at all times to receive service in your language of choice, no matter where you are. Thank you, Mr. Vinet. I now have a question regarding the use of bilingual officers. I'll ask you a very simple question. In a meeting at the high executive levels of the agency, in what language are the meetings held? Well, I would say that during upper management levels and executive meetings, the meetings are held in language of choice. The meetings are held bilingually, and all of our executives are designated bilingual and have a bilingual professional profile. So I assure you that they are all able to speak in the language of their choice. But do they speak in English or in French? Let's forget about choice and forget about policies. What happens in practice? It is in the language of their choice, depending on who is interacting, depending on the question or answer. So if I, as a francophone, participate in French, the answer will be given to me in French and vice versa. A possible solution, Mr. Vinet, instead of looking for bilingual employees, it might be better to look for francophone employees and then assign them to the posts where they're needed, because there is a labor shortage. That's a suggestion I would put to you. Thank you very much. This time, we will give the floor to Mr. Arsenault for 5 minutes. Please go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question will especially be for Ms. Burke, the Commissioner, who is gracing us with her presence. Ms. Burke, earlier, you shared everything you've observed on the ground. We've also heard from New Brunswick, Manitoba, the Atlantic provinces, heard from Acadians. French has taken secondary importance, and the pandemic exacerbated that feeling among Canadians. And that was reflected in the complaints you've received. Since between 2009, after 2009, there was also H1N1, and your Ontario predecessor at that time made a report, and he recommended to offer clear French services during an emergency situation. So I'd just like to go back in time. In April 2020, you were sat down with Premier Ford, and there had already been the H1N1 flu when this recommendation had been made to provide clear bilingual services. And from that time up until the day you were in conversation with Mr. Ford, you told him once again in 2020, this time, that had to be done. So what has happened since April 2020 in your conversation with Mr. Ford? Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Well, one thing is for sure, between those two dates, there was, I believe, a lack of planning that should have been established straight away following the former Commissioner Poilot's recommendation. That's a question that I've been asking myself since last January when I first took on this role. What I quickly noticed after only 8 weeks of pandemic was that the government was not sufficiently, or had not sufficiently prepared, rather, for the circumstances. Not only the Ford government, of course, the government in general, since that time, had not sufficiently planned for providing French language services in an emergency situation. The signal I received from the government was that the government was fully ready to help us as Francophones in the province to access services we had rights to. As the French Services Commissioner, I ensured that, because it falls under the French Languages Services Act, I was reassured that the government was able to put in place the technology, and that is what happened ever since. Since April, we also saw their commitment regarding what's available on websites, especially on the part of the Francophone Ministry and the Health Department. The Francophone Ministry works around the clock to make sure that services are provided to the public since last April. I have less than a minute left. It goes by so quickly. Of course, I could speak to you for so much longer. But if I'm understanding, you met with the Premier in April 2020. He had accepted and he understood that he would have to communicate to both language communities in a time of crisis. And you mentioned additional services and the websites and everything. If there were another pandemic, now my question, it could happen in 3, 4, 5 years from now. If there were another pandemic, will Ontario have learned lessons from the current pandemic to better serve the Francophone community? Well, I like the word reflex. That's exactly the word that I would repeat to the government. It needs to be a natural reflex within the government that from the outset, the government is ready to communicate in both official languages, and so that French is not relegated to secondary importance. What do I expect? Well, that was very clear in my report, what I expect from the government regarding its planning, which must be done immediately. And we expect for plans to be submitted by April 2022.
Et aussi que les francophones rendent compte annuellement de la mise en œuvre des plans en ce qui a trait aux obligations de la loi sur les services en français et la qualité des services dans la province.
Merci.
I'm sure that services are being offered in French, and the quality of the service as well, we will follow up on. Very well. For the next 2 MPs who will be putting questions, they will each have 2.5 minutes, so short questions and short answers, please. I will begin with Mr. Beaulieu. You have 2.5 minutes, sir. Quickly then, I will go back to my question. How many border services agents do you have, and how many of them are bilingual? Mr. Vinet. Go ahead, sir. Yes, very good. I'm just glancing at my colleague here to see that we do have the data here.
And 500 employees at our ports of entry, and 30.3% of them are bilingual.
Allez-y, Monsieur Beaulieu.
Over to you, Mr. Beaulieu. That's considerable. Surprising. My second question then, I mentioned it earlier. In Quebec, we sometimes and even often have difficulty being served in French. I was speaking to an attorney who works in litigation principally, and he told me that mostly he corresponds, or frequently at least, he corresponds in French with CBSA, but he gets answers back in English. So I would like to know what you have to say about that. And given that French is the common language of Quebec, do your officers and superintendents speak mostly in French in Quebec, and what proportions? In what proportion?
Bilingual officers in Quebec is actually quite high. A review of the data shows that in most locations it's close to 100%. So while we have 30.3% of our frontline workforce is bilingual, that percentage is not equal across the country, and it's most high in the Quebec province.
Peut-être je pourrais ajouter pour complémenter.
Perhaps I could add that all the positions which are designated as bilingual. Mr. Vinet, a little louder, please. Perhaps you could bring your microphone a little closer. Yes, I'm sorry. So in Quebec, all our positions are bilingual. And as to your question about the correspondence, anyone who corresponds with us in French should receive answers in French. Not to say that they mightn't get reports that might have been drawn up by other officers as part of information they're asking for that might indeed be in a single language, but the correspondence in response to the requests should be in the language in which the request came in. All right, from what I was able to see, it was sort of not that at all. I'm very sorry, Mr. Beaulieu. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. But the next 2.5 minutes are for Mr. Boulris. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. First question then is for Ms. Burke, the French Languages Services Commissioner of Ontario. Would bilingual premiums for bilingual service be a good idea to help keep bilingual employees who could offer a better French service? Yes, that's the type of incentive that is a possibility. I, of course, believe that the shortage of workers may be due to the fact that we don't have enough bilingual people, yes, but also incentives to work in French might be an option to take into consideration for the future. I know that at the federal court there's an extra amount paid if you can work in both languages. That's not necessarily the case in Ontario, though, but it's something that could be used as an incentive. Very well. In your opinion, does the Official Languages Act, the federal one, have an influence on the quality of services in French offered in Ontario? And if so, what's its effect? I do believe that the Official Languages Act is one of the, in fact, all legislation that protects linguistic rights do have an important effect on the state of francophonie in general. What I see from the Federal Act is that language rights are related to federal government services. In the province of Ontario, we also have a legislative tool, the law on French Language Services Act, which is of great help. But what I can see from the Official Languages Act is the need to support provincial services, support the provinces, basically, in their efforts to ensure that French language services are offered in the provinces. And that's an incentive that helps us ensure that the services and the French language in general are protected. The role that I play as a commissioner is to ensure that that's the case. A question for the CBSA. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll interrupt you here. Have you heard, though, of the possibility that reprisals might be taken on people who ask for services in France and that they would be frisked? Radio-Canada mentioned this. I have no knowledge of that happening, and clearly that would be contrary to our policies. That should not take place anywhere. Thank you very much. This is the end of the time allotted for this panel of witnesses. I would like to thank, in my name, in the name of the members of the committee and of our staff, thank you for your participation. I know that we have received a brief from Mr. Vinet. Ms. Burke, though, if you have any extra information, please don't hesitate to send it to us. Now, I would like to thank more particularly Ms. Kelly Burke, who's the French Language Services Commissioner of Ontario, and Mr. Carl Bouchard, the Director of Operations, French Language Services Unit of the Ombudsman of Ontario, and then from CBSA, Denis Vinet, Vice President, Travelers Branch, and Ms. Louise Udell, VP, Human Resources Branch. Thank you so much for your participation. So we will say goodbye to you for now, and we will adjourn for a few moments, suspend actually, to welcome our new witnesses.
So the committee is resuming its work today on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the government's ability to deliver information in both official languages. And so before I give you the floor for the witnesses, make sure that you activate your mic. You don't need to wait. If the question was addressed to you, go ahead and do so and answer.
Chair, et vous avez des services d'interprétation, donc vous pouvez choisir le.
And you can choose either floor, English, or French at the bottom of your screen. And please speak slowly and clearly. And when you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. And so I would like officially now to welcome the witnesses to the Standing Committee on Official Languages. Each group will have 7.5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by a round of questions. I will signal you when you have a minute left and when your time is up. So let us warmly welcome this afternoon the Public Service Alliance of Canada. We have with us today Mr. Alex Silas, Regional Executive Vice President, National Capital Region, and Ms. Chantal Fortin, alternate Regional Executive Vice President, National Capital Region. And from the Société Nationale de l'Acadie, Ms. Louise Imbeau, who is the president. So I have to inform you that during this hour we have for discussion, it is possible that we will be obliged to stop if the bells begin to ring. So I will give the floor now to the Public Service Alliance of Canada to make the presentation, please. You have 7.5 minutes. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. Thank you for inviting us to testify on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the government's ability to provide information in both official languages. And as the chair said, my name is Mr. Alex Silas, and I'm the Regional Executive Vice President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada for the National Capital Region. With me is my sister Chantal Fortin, alternate Regional Executive Vice President for the TUSAC. I was born in Moncton, New Brunswick. My family moved to Ottawa when I was younger. I am proud to be of Canadian descent, a francophone, and bilingual people who stand up for our rights. We represent over 48,000 members in the National Capital Region. About a year ago, COVID entered our lives, and it was quickly recognized as a threat to our health and the well-being of our communities. Thousands of federal public service workers had to adapt overnight to working remotely for what we thought would be a few weeks. We knew before COVID that there were problems with bilingualism in the federal public service. Without measures to protect bilingualism in the workplace, it would affect our ability to communicate with the public in both official languages and to deal with the response. If bilingualism is something we would have to put in, if it's valued, we will have to put in concrete measures to help us to deal with this. The pandemic has exacerbated the situation. So we are proposing some solutions, and I will give the floor to my colleague to speak to you about what suggestions we have. Go ahead, Ms. Fortin. Thank you. I'm done a test online with a technician, and I think we haven't solved the video problem. So thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Chantal Fortin, And as Alex mentioned, I am the alternate regional executive vice president for the PSAC NCR. I am a proud Franco-Ontarian, born here in Ottawa. I am comfortable speaking both French and English, having lived in the National Capital Region all my life. Despite the fact that I am bilingual, my mother tongue and language of education is French. Therefore, it takes more effort and time to work in my second language. Efforts and time that would otherwise be spent on my main tasks at work. I've been working for the Government of Canada for 19 years, and I am very concerned about the ability of workers like me to use the official language with which they are most comfortable. Here's what we hear from PSAC members. Important information is not always sent by messengers in both official languages. And when documents are sent in English only, management tells us that it will take longer to get the French translation. In a virtual world, with the point of order, please. Could you stop, please, a moment, Ms. Fortin? We have a point of order. We missed a little bit of what she said. If she could just go back about 15 seconds in her speech. I'm sorry, Ms. Fortin. I understand that you're having technical difficulties here, but I think your testimony is very important. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Fortin, if I could remind you, please, we can't see your video for the moment. If you could slow down a little bit, but without the video, it's really difficult for the interpreters. Thank you, I understand. Mr. Arsenault, was that the same point of order? So we will carry on. So, Ms. Fortin, could you continue? Just come back 2 or 3 sentences, please, and continue your presentation. Thank you. I'll speak a bit more slowly, and I'm sorry for the interpreters. So, just to reiterate, I've been working 19 years for the Government of Canada, and I'm very concerned about the ability of workers like me to use the official language with which they are most comfortable. And I would like to share a bit of what we have heard from our members. Important information is not always sent by managers in both official languages. And when documents are sent in English only, management tells us that it will take longer to get the French translation. Often, Francophones feel that they must speak in their second language in order to not leave their colleagues out, either because translation is not available or is not fast enough. Sometimes French speakers have difficulty understanding what is said in English during meetings, and because of virtual work, they no longer have easy access to their colleagues to pose questions and better understand what was said during the meeting. On the other hand, English speakers feel uncomfortable practicing their French in a formal meeting setting where everything is conducted in English. So sometimes we expect that bilingual workers will step in and provide translation at meetings rather than providing translation services. This means that bilinguals have a double duty. They are there to perform their regular duties and also to provide backup translation services. I hope that you believe, as I do, that that is too much. We also hear in customer contact centers that more unilingual Anglophones are hired than unilingual Francophones, and then offered private training to improve their French. But the same opportunities are much less frequent for unilingual Francophone applicants. This is a disadvantage and an inequity for Francophones and immigrants from French-speaking countries. Francophone members must fight to have access to French work tools, such as software, documentation, programs, and applications in French. This is unacceptable. The Government of Canada regularly emphasizes its pride in having a competent, diverse, dynamic, and bilingual public service. However, to maintain and enhance this capacity, we must also put in place the necessary tools and support systems to support the use of French in the workplace. I'd like to present a few solutions that could help improve bilingualism in the federal workplace. The bilingual bonus has remained at $800 for nearly 30 years. That's $800 a year. We have pushed the government to review its policy on several occasions, but it refuses to budge. The bilingual bonus must be increased to recognize the value of working in both official languages. More language training must be offered to encourage French and English workers to develop their second language. If the government is serious about improving bilingualism in the federal workplace, it should improve the bilingualism bonus and expand second language training. It's not one or the other. Treasury Board must also stop contracting out language training and focus on creating a public sector training program staffed by public service workers who focus. Ms. Fortin, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I know you can't see us, but could you wrap up in the next 15 or 20 seconds, please? Yes, I was going to give the floor back to Alex to conclude. Mr. Silas, in 10 seconds, please. Well, just the Government of Canada, if it wants to be serious about preserving our identity as a bilingual country and improving the ability to communicate and serve Canadians in both official languages, it will take work, investment, and it will take a concrete mandate. And I would just quickly like to say that we continue to discuss colonial languages. Let us not forget the importance of preserving Aboriginal languages. All this work done in the federal public service. Thank you, Mr. Silas. You'll be able to answer the questions and intervene on that. That's all of the time that we have for now. So for the next 7.5 minutes, I'd like to give the floor now to Ms. Louise Imbeau of the Société Nationale de l'Acadie. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to greet all of the members of the committee. I've had occasion to speak with some of you before, and I'm glad to be able to reiterate our message from our Société Nationale de l'Acadie. This société exists and has existed since 1891 and to defend the interests of Acadians, particularly the historical Acadia and the modern Acadia. We represent 4 associations in the 4 Atlantic provinces, as well as the youth associations in the 4 provinces, and many members who are around the world, in Quebec, Ontario, Louisiana, and in France. And so I thank you very much for having welcomed me here today. And I'll have 4 points that I would like to raise with you today, beginning with a little anecdote. It is an anecdote now, but it wasn't when it first happened. At the beginning of the pandemic, you'll recall that the Canadian government accepted to sell products on the market that weren't labeled in both official languages. And we said, all right, it's an emergency. And that is exactly the point here, which is to say that for years and years, Francophones in this country have said that there is an Official Languages Act, but it's not respected, it's not implemented, and it's not always enforced. And as a result, when there are urgent moments, there are emergencies that happen, we're not prepared to face them. And I heard Mr. Silas and Ms. Fortin say things of the same nature. The first result or consequence of the pandemic on the Official Languages Act is that it's already been at least 2 or 3 years that Francophones in the country have been demanding an update of this legislation. We have been asking for it to be modernized and that it be given teeth. And also that there be penalties for people who don't respect the legislation, businesses and particularly government services that don't comply with it. We've already heard this afternoon about many incidences where the legislation was not complied with and enforced. So the first consequence of the pandemic is that the bill that we're all have been waiting for to be updated, we're still waiting. And unfortunately, the minister spoke about her reforms that she has in mind in February. We were satisfied with our association that with the proposals put forward, whether it was a question of compliance with it, the incentives, and also to recognize the situation in each province, particularly New Brunswick.
So the first impact of the pandemic on official languages was many delays. And I'm not sure if it was just the pandemic that was responsible for those. It may just be a good excuse. Secondly, I would like to speak to you about the following. The pandemic impacts made it so that our society and Acadia in general was not able to continue with certain projects. We had projects on the go with Louisiana, Belgium, etc., and France. And we weren't able to continue with them, and we did not have the tools to be able to continue those relationships. But they are important because Francophones in the country are not very numerous, with the exception of Quebec, and our ability to community must rely on our international relations. Third point, I would like to speak about the strategy for Acadian artists on the international scene. We have an incredible amount of talent in Acadia, but our audience is small. So our artists must have the ability to showcase their product on the international scene. And that is an important aspect, not only regarding showcasing, but also with marketing, because our listenership, our audience is small. So if we look to countries abroad, that can triple the income for our artists who might go and do a tour in Belgium or France or elsewhere. It makes a significant difference. It's not the same impact as when, for example, Cirque du Soleil is given grants. However, Canada has put a $ on these international investments, so it's important to take into consideration that this type of thing has a different impact on an individual artist than it would on a major artist. Fourthly, I would like to bring the following to your attention. When it comes to Francophone immigration, the Canadian government committed to opening up immigration and ensuring that Francophone integration would increase across Canada and in certain provinces like New Brunswick, even more than that. But that was never achieved, and especially not during the pandemic this year. So if the government wants to ensure the longevity of French, the government must allocate resources for the future. And we must take into consideration the importance of Francophone immigration for the future, especially because of the adverse effect of the pandemic, because the proportion of Francophones in Canada has further decreased because of that. Those were the points I wanted to raise, Mr. Chair. Of course, I am very much looking forward to discussing these with committee members. Thank you very much, Ms. Imbo, for your presentation. We will now proceed to question period. Each member will have 6 minutes. I would also like to take the opportunity to tell Ms. Fortin that if you answer a question, please do speak slowly and clearly. Because we can't see you, that means the interpreters can not read your lips. For the next 6 minutes, we will begin this question period with Mr. Blaney. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our witnesses who have spoken to us about 2 realities of Francophone communities and bilingualism in country. The picture you drew for us, Ms. Fortin, was very alarming when it comes to French in the public service. And Ms. Imbo, you also brought up a number of points that are important for our communities, including immigration. Talking about culture and showcasing culture, I would just like to make a comment. There was a beautiful musical presentation recently by a local group in my riding. I have a few questions, but since there might be a vote in the House soon that might cut us off, I would like to thank you for your witness, for your testimonies, and I will share my time with my colleague, Mr. Godin. Thank you for enriching our point of view. Go ahead, Joël. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, dear colleague. And also, we had an artist among us, Mr. Arsenault. He's Acadian, so I would like to shout out to his potential, but we want to keep him in politics, Ms. Imbo. I want to ask a question to the Public Service Alliance. The study we are conducting concerns the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on official languages. I think that what you discussed today is a problem that existed before the pandemic. So what happened because of the pandemic that was new? And what sort of tools do you need so that things are facilitated for you as a public servant? I think that your claims were very well structured, etc. But can you tell me tangibly, what did the pandemic mean for official languages? Please go ahead. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. One thing the pandemic aggravated was the opportunity to communicate in French. There were a lot of lost opportunities to break the ice, to chat, to practice one's second language. Another thing we saw frequently was that communications were distributed in a single language, and when employees asked for the other language, that request was refused. That also was aggravated by the pandemic. Now, Ms. Fortin, you said that Francophones don't always understand when they participate in meetings at work. Ms. Fortin, during the pandemic, did that situation put Canadians' health at risk? Ms. Fortin. Certainly, when it comes to mental health, because those people who find it hard to understand are more nervous, are more stressed. Ms. Imbo or Ms. Fortin, I want to talk about the impact on the public because of the pandemic. So yes, you did speak to that, but specifically this situation, what was its impact on the Canadian public? Well, if employees do not feel adequately equipped to express themselves in their first language or their second language, whichever they choose, that will necessarily have an impact in turn on the Canadian public. And we see this increasingly where, for example, people with their contractors. Contractors claim to be bilingual, but are not. And this has an adverse impact on service delivery to the public in one language or the other. Thank you, Ms. Fortin. Now I have a question for Ms. Ambeau. You identified 4 consequences of COVID-19 on the great French language. Now I'd like to know, once the pandemic is over, what will your priority be as an organization so that the Canadian government can contribute to strengthening the French language through our Acadian friends? Mr. Chair and Mr. Committee Member, thank you for that question. I think it is extremely obvious. The new version, rather, of the Official Languages Act must be adopted. Yes, I certainly understand you there. And all throughout the duration of the pandemic, we were able to show that there were parts of the law that were not implemented, that were not respected. And that meant that people didn't receive the services they had a right to receive and did not have the right to speak in French, for example. And the people who usually advocate for this type of thing were busy with the emergency, so they weren't advocating as often. Also, when it comes to universities or groups like our group, will pick up the pace because there were delays and we fell behind because of the pandemic. Thank you, Ms. Ambeau. Thank you, Mr. Godin. We may continue with Ms. Ambeau because the next 6 minutes go to Mr. Arsenault. Mr. Arsenault, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it might be Ms. Ambeau. Thank you to all witnesses. I really can't hold back from asking Mr. Alex if his mother is Linda. Yes, Linda is my mom. My first questions will be for Ms. Ambeau because she represents the SNA, the Acadian National Society. The Acadian diaspora in the 4 Atlantic provinces are 4 beautiful provinces. And our study here today is on the impact of the pandemic on the government's ability to provide information in both languages. So what did you observe was the same in the 4 provinces, and what was different in each province? Well, when it comes to New Brunswick and PEI, inaudible for the interpreter, the public health officer, the chief public health officer in those four provinces regularly spoke in French. There was not a significant difference in PEI and in New Brunswick, rather, but in the 2 other provinces, Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, the chief public health officers spoke on behalf of the public health authorities and were not able to speak in French to the media or to the public. However, these are public services that the federal government could play a role in and could significantly finance or fund, rather, those services for the benefit of the provinces. We also saw that there were differences. For instance, in Nova Scotia, when the premier spoke in French, it helped people trust that the messages were the same in both languages. Sometimes you feel almost like it's a gift when someone speaks both languages, but that shouldn't be the case. Excuse me for interrupting you. I just have 5 minutes. Public services are delivered by the provinces. What did you observe in New Brunswick? Well, yes, I do represent the New Brunswick Society. to a certain extent. So a major leader in New Brunswick did not bring along a representative or spokesperson with them to speak in French. The demand was there, but Jennifer Russell, the public health officer, compensated for it, but the premier did not judge that it was important to speak to his public in French. And only some translation was provided sometime after. It is a provincial responsibility when it comes to official languages, especially in New Brunswick, because of constitutional realities, as we know in that province. I remember an incident where a journalist asked our premier a question. I'm sure you remember this. I would like you to tell us what you took away from that incident and what you think New Brunswick's responsibilities were. Well, New Brunswick is defined as a bilingual province, and its commitment to French is enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Official Languages Act. So, of course, that incident infringed on that. There is a society called the New Brunswick Acadia Society that handles those files for the New Brunswick public. So that is why I tried to elucidate the situation for all Acadians from the Atlantic provinces.
So what went on in New Brunswick is one matter, but in the other provinces as well, the situation is slightly different because the obligations are different, the requirements are different. But the Canadian government certainly does have to meet certain requirements for the entirety of the Atlantic region. And of course, it should be using the right levers to ensure that services are really recognized and available for each Francophone area. I have less than a minute, Ms. Imbeau. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, of course. So back to the provinces, especially Nova Scotia, for example, and I'm still speaking of this period of the pandemic. The Commissioner for Official Languages in Ottawa, Mr. Théberge, tells us that there's now a way to interact, to send, for example, information in both official languages about using a medication or services or so on. Are you aware of whether the provinces have called on the government to help them in this regard? 15 or 20 seconds. I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid. Very well. Thank you, Mr. Arsenault. So unfortunately, our time has come to an end. Thank you very much. And we will now hear from Mr. Beaulieu, who has the floor for the next 6 minutes. Mr. Chair, yes, I'm so sorry, Mr. Beaulieu, yes. I would just like to advise you that the lights are flashing here in the room and the bells are ringing. So I believe that you will need to either suspend or not if you have unanimous consent not to. Ah, indeed. Yes, indeed. The bells are ringing. So I'm not sure. I believe we have 15 minutes. Yes. I see 30 minutes at this point, Chair. Very well then. Dear MPs, it's up to you to decide. Would you like to continue until the half hour? Yes? Good. So we could perhaps finish the next round. Yes, we'd have 2 more 6-minute periods to finish this entire round, and we will have time to do that. And then we will still have time to proceed to the vote. Thank you very much. So back to Mr. Beaulieu. Go ahead, Mr. Beaulieu. Yes. Hello, and thank you. Thank you to our witnesses for their presentations. To begin with, I would like to speak to the representative of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. We have also heard from another representative of PSAC in Quebec, and it was pretty surprising, actually, what this person had to tell us. It sort of overlaps with what you've been telling us, it being difficult to work in French. And they even told us that when it came to language, they felt there was systemic discrimination, which was profoundly present at all levels of the civil service at the federal level. Would you agree with that? Well, yes. Clearly, it's a disadvantage if you're a Francophone civil servant. At the hiring process, an Anglophone applicant will more often receive a posting or be promoted, but not the same if you're a unilingual Francophone. You will not receive as much consideration, and you will receive information in English. On paper, of course, it's supposed to be equal opportunity, but in practice, we can see that that's not really the case. Very often in meetings, the meeting will get underway fully in English. Even when most people around the table, let's say in a Zoom meeting, are French speakers. Nevertheless, the meeting goes ahead in English because that's just the way it's done. That's what everyone thinks has to happen. So yes, there is a disadvantage to being a Francophone in the civil service. This makes no sense, especially outside Quebec. Of course, outside Quebec, it's much easier to find people who know English than French, but it should be the inverse. If you are hiring unilingual Anglophones, well, there should always be a way to transfer things over to someone else and, of course, to encourage training as well. We were also told that hiring processes are problematic. The test of bilingual capacity being easier for Anglophones than for Francophones. Would you agree with that? Yes, indeed. Our members say so, that it's not the same level of testing if you're a Francophone applicant compared to an Anglophone applicant for testing the second language capacity. Basically, you're telling us that this is something like what Mr. Mathieu Barrière told us, that especially in virtual meetings, managers speak to people in English, and you even said that at times you receive correspondence in English, you ask for it in French, and you're told you can't have it, and that's really in violation of the Official Languages Act. That being the case, what can you do? Do you systematically complain about such situations? And I imagine that employees are a little bit concerned that there may be reprisals if they complain too much and so on. So what's your view of that? Well, of course, on a case-by-case basis, we do advise our local sections to complain, to file complaints if they had grounds for them. But the solution that we suggest is a higher bilingualism bonus. Make a real incentive for civil servants to learn to work in both languages. I mean, let's be clear. The bonus for bilingualism has remained at $800 and hasn't changed for 30 years. $800, not enough. That would be one solution. Another would be to offer more training to encourage bilingualism and offer training really within the civil service. Federal civil servants training other federal civil servants. Earlier, I believe it was Ms. Fortin who was saying that we should put an end to outsourcing linguistic training. Could you tell us more about that? Why should we stop outsourcing training in languages? Is it because outsourced training is of a lesser quality or what? In 1 minute and 5 seconds, please. Yes, of course. The quality isn't as high, and as well, the context isn't the same. Of course, at the federal government, we have our own jargon, and it's very difficult to find outsourced training that really works with that language base, which is specific to our work. So there's quality problems at many levels. Would you say that recently you've seen more outsourcing? Yes. There's more outsourcing at all levels, not only for training in languages, but throughout the civil service. Yes, we've seen the same thing for interpreters and for translation. So, Ms. Imbeau, do you find it makes sense that after 50 years under the Official Languages Act, you still need to mobilize and use pressure to receive services in French? Well, listening to my colleagues here, I can see that if in 50 years we haven't managed to solve this problem in the civil service, it means that, something essential is missing, probably goodwill, because 50 years for a culture change, that's a lot of years. Something should have changed. And the new Official Languages Act should address this. And we should bring it in soon, this reviewed OLA. Thank you very much. The next 6 minutes, the last 6 minutes, are for Mr. Boulris. Mr. Boulris, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm very glad that you chose to allow us to go forward. And it's very nice to see Ms. Fortin, whom we can now see on the screen. You at the Alliance have mentioned the requirement to raise the bilingualism bonus, which hasn't changed for 30 years and is still set at $800. What would the right amount be? Should it be a percentage or should it be a set amount? Well, that should be negotiated at the National Joint Council. But what we would like to see would be a discussion of the matter, because every time we try to bring this up, we're told that, the bonus is going to be withdrawn entirely. That's the threat we hear. So we would like to see this discussed openly and like it to be understood that the time has come to offer more. I'm so sorry, and I'm surprised to hear that there are threats that the bonus will be totally withdrawn. I'm sorry, I have children playing nearby in the house. That's what you're hearing. You also mentioned the impact of distance working on your members, but also on the population, the quality of services. Has the government provided you with all the tools you need to work from home? Meaning the hardware, the headphones, the headsets, and the ability to pay for high-speed internet for your members. Has all that been made available to you? I can say that at the outset of the pandemic, all this was a little more inconsistent. We had some members who didn't have the right tools to work from home. Things have worked out a little bit over the year. Nevertheless, we do see from department to department and service to service, a lack of follow-through, a number of decisions left to managers that don't lead to the best results for workers. So better than things were at the outset, but there are still some gaps. All right, so there's still some work to be done there. So Ms. Imbeau, over to you. I have a question about the cultural diplomacy program and the fact that it's disappeared. You mentioned its importance to Acadian artists, how it helped them extend their reach, share their cultural products outside their region. Unfortunately, this diplomatic effort seems to have disappeared. Perhaps it should be brought back into the Official Languages Act in this review. Yes, it's really important to allow artists to influence the planet, much like Canada wishes to project its identity as a bilingual country around the world. It's not just imaginary. This is a reality. It's part of who we are. About the internet, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there are a number of places in Canada where people still have trouble using the internet, accessing internet services. And the large companies that offer these services charge so much to people to get on the internet. So across Canada, things aren't fair. Things aren't equitable. And we gave a presentation to the CRTC to ask that this be taken into account. especially in rural regions and far-flung areas of Canada that haven't access to appropriate services, like in certain areas of l'Acadie. It's important for our culture. It's important for our artists to be able to influence the world beyond their borders, but it's something that needs to be there for small companies, not just for big companies, and that's what we've seen over the last few years. Large companies, yes, because, they have economic clout, but small companies and individuals don't have access. So perhaps that needs to be covered in a specific program, something that has to keep in mind the influence that Canada wants to have and the well-being of artists. Yes, the effect of, economic clout is perhaps not as large for an artist, but an artist's ability to live from their production in French, live from their art, it's so important. Yes, and eventually the entirety of Canada benefits from a healthy art sector. We know sometimes large companies, 2,000, 3,000 people, yes, they get attention, but the cultural sector, it's a lot of individuals who aren't necessarily agglomerated into large groups, Yes, I'm fully aware of that. And that's why it's important that in the OLA review organizations, such as you, be named in the Act, not merely institutions be named in it. Yes, institutions, though, can speak for others, and that's the only reason why we want to be involved. A university, a college, will speak for its own needs, but organizations such as ours, which represent a large group, can speak for the community, and that's important. Thank you, Mr. Boulris. Thank you so much. I know that the bells are still ringing. I would simply like, nevertheless, to take a moment to really thank our witnesses, to thank them for having spoken to us. If you wish to send a briefing, don't hesitate. So for the Public Service Alliance of Canada, thank you, Mr. Alex Silas, Regional Executive Vice President, National Capital Region, and Ms. Chantal Fortin, Alternate Regional Executive Vice President, National Capital Region, and from the Société Nationale de l'Acadie, Ms. Louise Imbeau, President. Thank you. My dear colleagues, now, before we part, in the name of all the members of the committee and my own name as well, I would just like to point out that this is the last day we have our clerk, Ms. José Ellison. I would like to thank her for her good work for us. Thank her for having remained with us for so long, and I'm sure that we all wish you great success in the days to come. And I also wish to welcome the Ms. Nancy Vaughan, who in the past has been running our sound test. She will be our new clerk. I wish her all the success that will be hers with us. So thank you to our technicians and all the staff who have helped us make this session possible. And I adjourn the meeting.